Hey everyone, this is Mike from the Comic Book Trove, back today with another Omnibus review. Today I'm going to be taking a look at the fairly recently released X-Men Extinction Agenda Omnibus. Now this is one that is a big deal for me personally as an X-Men Omnibus collector, because with this it now means that the entirety of Chris Claremont's original kind of long epic saga writing X-Men is now completed in this format, and that's a huge deal because I remember back when I first started collecting these things, years ago now, absolutely ages ago it seems like, I'd always thought from that early stage it would be very good as a kind of long-term goal if one day we could have all of the Claremont stuff collected in these books, and now it's a reality, it's the case, and I just think that's great, for me. Very pleased to say that that's now something I've got in my collection, all that Chris Claremont stuff in a nice row on the bookshelf in these big omnibuses. Very nice. But that being said, this is far from a perfect book or a perfect story, and I'll get into a little bit of that obviously as I start to look through it. But first, let's have a look at the dust jacket. We're seeing a cover here by Jim Lee. This was a standard variant cover to the omnibus. I do really like this, to be fair. We do see a fair amount of Jim Lee artwork in here, along with the work of several other artists. You're getting a huge kind of array of different artwork and styles in here. I will say that the Jim Lee stuff probably is my favourite, but that's not a hugely high bar to get over in this particular case. There's some very inconsistent kind of quality of artwork going on in this book, in my opinion. But anyway, looking at the rest of it, the spine, obviously got your X-Men logo, Extinction Agenda, and this image of Storm as she appears in part of this story. On the back, we have the little bit of blurb, obviously the cover gallery of what we're getting in here, those different front covers, bit of information as to what the story's focusing on. And then down there you get your usual list of contents and some credits as well, giving you the names of different writers and artists appearing in this book. Now, this omnibus is about 1,000 pages plus extras. Now that is quite a lot for what is really a relatively short story. Prior to having this omnibus, I had been using this trade paperback that I bought a few years ago, and this just collects the main Extinction Agenda event itself and not really any of the filler stuff that you're getting in this book. Honestly, if you are purely looking to plug the gap, as it were, between the X-Men by Chris Claremont and Jim Lee omnibuses Volume 1 and 2, if you don't have that original Extinction Agenda oversized hardcover that came out that had this material in it, if you can get a trade paperback like this one, I don't know how available this specific edition is now, but that is probably kind of the better way to go, because what's in here is a lot, and I mean about 600 pages, give or take, of what I can only really describe as filler material. On the book itself, though, the hardcover design, I do really like this. Jim Lee artwork again, seeing Jean Grey and Storm in a younger incarnation here at part of this story. At the point where it begins, she was de-aged because of stuff that had happened previously. X-Men is a pretty complicated series, it's quite convoluted at times, so I'm not going to try and break down everything that was going on necessarily to set the premise for this. But rest assured, if something sounds weird or crazy, it probably is, because that's X-Men for you. The contents page then. So we do get a contents page, and this is a fairly helpful contents page in the way that it's structured, because it actually uses these little lines to break up the sections of what's actually collected in here. So for example, we start the book off with the Days of Future Present story, which is collected across 4 different annuals from Fantastic Four, New Mutants, X-Factor, and X-Men itself. And that is a sequel of sorts to the original Days of Future Past story by Claremont and John Byrne years ago. And then we get onto the actual Extinction Agenda event here, but as I say, that's only taking you up to roughly page 400 of this omnibus. And then the rest of it, all of this, is kind of just unnecessary reading, really. You've got a mixed bag of stuff, some of it fun, some of it not so much. And yeah, it makes this a little bit of a hard book to recommend, personally, for me, unless, like me, you're just kind of a crazy omnibus completionist who just wants to have all this stuff in this format because it's just what you do. In which case, you probably don't need me to sell this to you. It probably doesn't matter what I say one way or the other. If you feel that way, as I did, you'll probably get this regardless. But, for other people who are maybe either not massively into this story, you could probably skip this one if I'm being completely honest. This first story, Days of Future Present, so we see the Franklin Richards from the future, from a future anyway, from that future, coming back in time to find and reunite with Rachel Summers, who he was in a relationship with at that point. She had come back in time at this point in the X-Men history. She was kind of firmly established in the present. She was mostly working with Excalibur, the UK-based super team. Also had Nightcrawler, Kitty Pryde, Captain Britain, and Megan. And this is all about him kind of coming back and trying to, as I say, reunite with her. It's okay, but, you know, even this, which I feel like some people do like this story, and, you know, it's pretty good. But, again, this isn't exactly necessary reading. The main bulk of, obviously, this omnibus is Extinction Agenda itself, which is this. Starts here. So this is taking place across X-Men, X-Factor, and New Mutants. And this is the story of the island nation of Genosha, which is extremely anti-mutant. It had already been introduced and established as a location in issues previous to this, where the X-Men had had a bit of a clash with the Genoshan authorities on another occasion. And this whole story is kind of Genosha launching a kind of revenge attack against the X-Men once more. And it gets pretty extreme and crazy in the sort of typical late 80s, early 90s style. We've got that image here then, so we've got some Jim Lee artwork on the X-Men issues. We have Rob Liefeld doing, I believe, New Mutants. And, as I say, a few other artists doing other stuff in here. This particular story, as much as I say I'm really happy to have it to plug that gap, and I am, as a sort of completionist, but Extinction Agenda is not one of my favourite X-Men stories, I have to say. Like, it's not bad. If I really didn't like it, I wouldn't have bothered with this. I would have lived with having that gap in my collection. But there's just something where this feels like it probably goes on a bit long. I'd think that that's probably the easiest way to describe it. Now, the main villain here, I'll say this though, it probably is one of the most visually memorable for me of a lot of different comic stories that I've read. We've got Cameron Hodge here, the former one-time seemingly friend and ally of X-Factor and more specifically of Angel, Warren Worthington, who by this time has very much revealed his true colours as being somebody who truly hates mutants, but more so than that is the kind of physical, I don't even know, he's basically transformed into this absolutely freakish kind of cybernetic spider insect type creature where he's just a head on this kind of mechanical apparatus. Very creepy design, obviously intentionally so. Whether or not, you know, it's a little bit too crazy for you, I mean, to me, I think it's ridiculous, but it is memorable, so I'll say that. You know, they did give a visually striking design to that villain in here, no doubt. But, it is interesting, you know, it is a fun story. But it's also kind of creepy, and I think that that's the intention, because this whole kind of Genoshan society, the way that they really use and manipulate mutants for their own purposes, they use them effectively like slave labor. There are some very, I think, obvious and deliberate parallels being drawn here to kind of real world events and instances of discrimination against minorities. X-Men, something, you know, a series that's always dealt with those kinds of themes. But here, more so than other times, it's very much on show and very prominent. Is it being handled in a particularly subtle way? Definitely not. But I don't think that's necessarily a problem. It makes its point, no doubt about that. And we do see in here as well the whole instance of, I mentioned the de-aged Storm. It is during this story where she is kind of returned to her normal age, ultimately, but not before going through some trauma. This event also is kind of the key trigger point which changed the New Mutants series. It's very significant for New Mutants as a team because it was pretty much because of what happened in here. As a result of this event, in the immediate aftermath of all this, is more or less where New Mutants transforms into X-Force for the first time. And obviously you've got that whole classic for better or worse, Rob Liefeld era on X-Force from the 90s. So, yeah, it is definitely an event with some significance for the whole X-Men kind of world in general. But, as I say, you know, if I compare it to, for example, just other crossover events that had, you know, preceded this, it's not my favourite. So I would say I kind of prefer, in fact, all of Mutant Massacre, Fall of the Mutants, and Inferno. I think are probably all stronger events, better stories, really, than this. But here we get to very much the point where, and we're not even halfway through this book, but from this stage onwards, Extinction Agenda is concluded, and we're now just looking at all kinds of miscellaneous stuff, and it does feel like a lot of this was really just thrown in here to bulk up the page count and justify this being an omnibus rather than a reprint of that oversized hardcover of Extinction Agenda from years ago. This is why, as I say, I can't strongly recommend this book unless you are either a huge X-Men fan or a total completionist, or both, obviously. I've read some of this stuff. Frankly, I found it quite hard to get through. It was a bit of a slog, and I'm not even close to finishing it. I don't even know how quickly I'm going to go back to it and finish a lot of it. Because, yeah, it just kind of felt a bit unnecessary. I mean, kind of once I'd finished Extinction Agenda, it just feels a bit weird to then go on to all this, I guess, supplementary stuff, you could call it. But very much optional reading. Like, if you never read any of this stuff, like that's in the second half of this omnibus, I don't think you'll be any worse off. There's nothing in here that strongly kind of enriches your understanding of any of these characters so much. And just the sheer volume of it makes it a bit of an issue for me. I don't know. But obviously, very much interested to hear the thoughts of others on this. You know, this particular omnibus and the way it's structured with all this extra stuff in it. But obviously, Extinction Agenda itself, you know, what does anyone else think of that event? Because, you know, it's pretty good. And it obviously does give you that final piece of the puzzle, so to speak, for this whole Claremont era of X-Men. So I am pleased to have this. As much as I've been a little bit negative about this book, that's only because of the sheer volume, as I say, of this somewhat unnecessary material in here. But overall, yeah, still something I don't regret having. But for others, I'm pretty sure a trade paperback would suffice in this case, or even just reading it digitally, to be totally honest. That's my honest thoughts on it anyway. And hopefully this has been in some way useful or insightful for anybody. Maybe on the fence about this book, trying to decide one way or the other whether or not it's for you. It's a very nice looking book, no doubt about it. It's a good X-Men omnibus overall, but it would not make, you know, like a top 10 book, a top 10 omnibuses book for me anyway. But thanks as always for watching. That's appreciated as always. I'll be back in soon to discuss something else.